The sound of Jamie's wailing pierced through my exhaustion like a blade. 3 hours of sleep wasn't enough, not after working double shifts at Rossi's. My bones ached as I dragged myself from the threadbare couch to the makeshift nursery, just a corner of my studio apartment sectioned off with a second-hand curtain. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet, each step a reminder of how close we were to rock bottom. "Shh, baby boy, Mommy's here," I whispered, lifting my 8-month-old son from his crib. His face was flushed, tears streaming down his chubby cheeks. I pressed my lips to his forehead. Too warm, my stomach knotted. We couldn't afford another emergency room visit, not after the last one drained what little savings I had left. Outside, rain pattered against the single window, its frame rattling with each gust of October wind. The ceiling leaked in the corner, the steady drip, drip, drip joining Jamie's cries in a miserable symphony. I bounced him gently, my eyes burning from exhaustion. "It's okay, it's okay," I repeated, the mantra as much for me as for him. Jamie had been sick for 3 days now. Nothing serious, the clinic doctor had said. Just a cold that needed to run its course, but tonight felt different. His little body radiated heat, and his usually strong grip felt weaker as he clutched my worn t-shirt. I needed help. Not just any help. I needed money for medicine, for a doctor who would actually examine him for more than 5 hurried minutes, for food that wasn't approaching its expiration date. I needed Chris. My fingers trembled as I scrolled through my phone contacts. Christopher Reyes, Jamie's father, hadn't answered my calls in months, not since I'd told him I was pregnant. His last words still haunted me. "That's not my problem." Then he'd blocked my number, but I'd heard from a mutual friend that he'd changed his number recently. Maybe, just maybe, if he heard his son crying, something would shift inside him. The new number had cost me half a day's wages. Information wasn't free in our neighborhood. I'd been saving it for an emergency. This was an emergency. With Jamie balanced on my hip, I dialed the number, each tone echoing in my cramped apartment. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3. My heart pounded against my ribs. What would I even say? "Please, Chris, your son is sick. I know you said you wanted nothing to do with us, but..." "Who is this?" The voice that answered wasn't Chris's. It was deeper, colder, with the faintest trace of an accent I couldn't place. Italian, maybe? Words caught in my throat. I'd dialed wrong. I had to have dialed wrong. "I'm sorry," I stammered. I was trying to reach Christopher Reyes. Silence stretched on the other end, heavy and charged. In the background, I could hear the clink of glasses, muffled conversations. There is no Christopher Reyes at this number. The man's voice was measured, each word precisely chosen. "Who are you?" Jamie's cries grew louder, his little body shuddering against mine. "Shh, it's okay, baby," I whispered, forgetting for a moment that the call was still connected. "Is that a child?" the stranger asked, his tone shifting slightly. Something in his voice made me pause. Not concern exactly, but interest. Sharp, sudden interest. "Yes, my son. He's sick. I'm sorry to have bothered you." I moved to end the call, my cheeks burning with embarrassment. "Wait." The command stopped my finger above the screen. "Your son is ill, and you're calling this Christopher in the middle of the night?" I swallowed hard. Why was I even talking to this stranger? "He's my son's father. I hoped he might help." The admission tasted bitter. Another silence, longer this time. When the man spoke again, his voice had dropped even lower. "This Christopher, he doesn't help with his child." "No," I whispered, surprising myself with my honesty. "He wanted nothing to do with us." I heard what sounded like a glass being set down, then a door closing. The background noise faded. "What's your name?" he asked. "Eliza," I answered automatically, then mentally kicked myself. Why was I giving my name to a complete stranger? "Eliza," he repeated, as if testing how it felt on his tongue. "And your son? What's wrong with him?" "He has a fever. I think it's just a cold, but..." My voice cracked. "I'm worried." "Where do you live, Eliza?" The question sent a chill down my spine. "I should go," I said quickly. "This was a mistake." "You called this number for help," he said, his tone brooking no argument. "Let me help you. You don't even know me. I know enough." There was a rustle on the other end, the sound of a chair scraping. "You're a mother with a sick child and no support. That tells me everything important." Jamie's crying had softened to whimpers, his exhaustion finally winning over discomfort. I sank onto the edge of my bed, my legs suddenly too weak to hold us both. "Why would you help me?" I asked, suspicion cutting through my desperation. He chuckled, the sound both warm and dangerous. "Let's say I have a particular dislike for men who abandon their responsibilities." Before I could respond, he continued, "You have 30 minutes to decide if you want my help. If you do, text this number your address. If not..." I could almost hear him shrug. "Best of luck finding this Christopher." The call ended, leaving me staring at my phone screen in disbelief. Who was this man? And why would he offer to help a stranger in the middle of the night? I laid Jamie back in his crib, his fever having granted him temporary relief through sleep. I pressed a cool washcloth to his forehead and watched his little chest rise and fall. What choice did I have? The medicine cabinet contained nothing but half a bottle of children's Tylenol and a box of Band-Aids. My bank account held $43.78, not enough for an urgent care visit if his fever spiked again. 29 minutes later, I sent the text. Just my address. No message. No plea. Either this stranger would help, or he wouldn't. I had nothing left to lose. I didn't expect a response. I certainly didn't expect what happened 17 minutes after I sent the text. 3 sharp knocks at my door made me jump. It wasn't the hesitant knock of a neighbor or the pounding of my landlord demanding this month's late rent. It was authoritative. Certain. Hard in my throat, I peered through the peephole. The hallway's dim light revealed a tall figure in a dark coat. Behind him stood another man, broader, his stance wide and alert, eyes constantly scanning the corridor. A driver or bodyguard, maybe, the kind of security that didn't belong in my rundown apartment building. I hesitated, my hand on the deadbolt. This was madness. I didn't know this man. What had desperation driven me to? "Eliza." His voice carried clearly through the thin door. "Open the door." Something in his tone made it impossible to refuse. I slid back the chain and turned the lock. The man who stood before me wasn't what I'd expected. I'm not sure what I had expected. Someone older, perhaps. Rougher. Instead, he was probably in his early 30s, with sharp features that seemed carved from marble. His eyes were dark, almost black in the shadowy hallway. And they took in everything. My disheveled appearance, the cramped apartment behind me, the visible exhaustion etched into my face. He wore a suit that probably cost more than 6 months of my rent. The fabric so fine it seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. No jewelry except a single gold signet ring and a watch that gleamed dully on his wrist. "You're Eliza," he said. Not a question, but a confirmation. I nodded, suddenly aware of how I must look. Hair piled in a messy bun, wearing sweatpants and a stained t-shirt, dark circles beneath my eyes. "And your son?" His gaze moved past me, searching the apartment. "Sleeping," I said, finding my voice. His fever broke a little while ago. He nodded once, then gestured to the man behind him. The bodyguard, there was no other word for him, handed over a sleek leather bag. "May I come in?" Again, not really a question. I stepped back, allowing him into my tiny world. He seemed too large for the space, too powerful, like a panther in a birdcage. His presence immediately transformed my apartment, making it seem smaller, shabbier. "My name is Antonio Ricci," he said, setting the bag on my kitchen counter. "This is medical supplies. And this..." He reached into his coat and produced an envelope. "Should cover any additional expenses." I stared at the envelope, unable to move. "I can't accept money from you." His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You can, and you will. For your son." As if on cue, Jamie stirred, his weak cry floating from behind the curtain. Without thinking, I moved toward him, but Antonio was already striding across the room, his movements fluid and purposeful. "Wait," I started, alarmed at the thought of this stranger approaching my child, but something in his demeanor stopped me. There was no threat in his posture, just determination. He drew back the curtain carefully and looked down at Jamie. For a moment, something crossed his face. An emotion so raw and fleeting I couldn't identify it, before his features smoothed back into impassivity. "He needs a doctor," Antonio said, turning back to me. "Not just medicine." "I know that," I replied, a flash of defensiveness breaking through my fear. "I was going to take him to the clinic tomorrow." Antonio's expression hardened. "Not a clinic. A proper doctor." He pulled out his phone, his fingers moving swiftly across the screen. "My personal physician will be here in 20 minutes. At this hour? That's not necessary?" he finished, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made my protest die in my throat. "I decide what's necessary, Eliza." He spoke my name differently than anyone ever had before, giving weight to each syllable like it was something precious and rare. It sent a strange shiver down my spine. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, the question barely audible. Antonio moved closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne. Something subtle and expensive, sandalwood and amber. "I told you. I dislike men who abandon their responsibilities." His eyes darkened further. "This Christopher. He works for me. Or he did." The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. "What?" "Christopher Reyes. He handled some deliveries for one of my businesses. Skimmed money he thought I wouldn't notice. Disappeared 3 weeks ago." His gaze dropped to Jamie, then back to me. "He never mentioned he had a son." Ice flooded my veins. The Chris I knew worked as a bartender at an upscale club downtown. He'd never mentioned any other job, any boss named Antonio. But then, there were probably a lot of things Chris hadn't told me during our brief relationship. "I don't understand," I said, though a terrible understanding was beginning to dawn. "What kind of business do you run?" Antonio's smile was cold, nothing like the professional warmth he'd shown earlier. "The kind where loyalty matters above all else. The kind where family is sacred." He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming in the small space. "The kind where betrayal has consequences." In that moment, I realized exactly what I had invited into my home. The fine suit, the bodyguard, the easy way he dispensed money and commanded doctors in the middle of the night. The Italian name, the talk of loyalty and consequences. Antonio Ricci was connected, dangerously connected, and I had just told him where to find the man who had stolen from him. "I haven't seen or spoken to Chris in months," I said quickly, panic rising in my throat. "I don't know where he is. I believe you." His voice was surprisingly gentle. "But you tried to call him tonight, which means you had a number for him." I swallowed hard. "A friend said he changed his number. I paid for the information, but obviously it was wrong." "Not wrong," Antonio said, pulling out his own phone. "This was his new number, until I took it over after he departed." He showed me the screen, and sure enough, it displayed the same number I had called. Jamie cried out again, louder this time. Without thinking, I pushed past Antonio and gathered my son in my arms. His skin felt cooler, but his cries were weaker than usual. "It's okay, baby," I murmured, rocking him gently. "Help is coming." When I turned around, Antonio was watching us with an expression I couldn't decipher, something between fascination and possessiveness, as though we were rare specimens he'd discovered and now considered his. "He has your coloring," he observed. "Your eyes. Everyone says that," I replied automatically, continuing to sway with Jamie. "But nothing of his father. That's fortunate." There was no mistaking the contempt in his voice when he mentioned Chris. A sharp knock at the door made me flinch. Antonio nodded to his bodyguard, who opened it to reveal an older man carrying a medical bag. "Dr. Marino," Antonio greeted him. "Thank you for coming so quickly." The doctor glanced at me briefly before focusing on Jamie. "Let me see the child," he said, his voice accented but kind. What followed was the most thorough medical examination Jamie had ever received. Doctor. Marino checked everything: ears, throat, chest, reflexes, all while asking me detailed questions about his symptoms and medical history. Antonio stood nearby, watching the proceedings with the intensity of a hawk. "Ear infection," Dr. Marino finally pronounced. Quite severe. He'll need antibiotics immediately. He reached into his bag and produced a bottle. Twice daily for 10 days. The fever should reduce within 24 hours. If not, call me. He handed me a card with his direct number. Thank you, I whispered, clutching the medicine like a lifeline. The doctor packed up his bag and exchanged a few quiet words with Antonio before leaving. The bodyguard followed, leaving me alone with Antonio and a now sleeping Jamie. An ear infection, I said, the relief making my knees weak. Just an ear infection, which could have become much worse without proper treatment, Antonio pointed out, his voice suddenly hard. You were going to take him to a clinic, where they would have made you wait for hours, prescribed generic antibiotics, and sent you home with a bill you couldn't pay. The accuracy of his assessment stung. I was doing the best I could. Something in my voice must have reached him, because his expression softened fractionally. I know. He gestured to the envelope still sitting on the counter. That will help until you find better employment. You have a job, I said, unable to keep the defensiveness from my voice. At Rossi's. Waitressing. At my startled look, he shrugged. Your uniform jacket is hanging by the door. The restaurant name is on it. It pays the bills, most of them anyway. I gently laid Jamie back in his crib, tucking his favorite blanket around him. It's not enough, Antonio stated flatly. Not for both of you. I turned to face him, suddenly tired of feeling small. Thank you for your help tonight, for the doctor and the medicine, but my financial situation isn't your concern. Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. You made it my concern when you called me. I called you by mistake. There are no mistakes, Eliza. Only opportunities disguised as accidents. He moved closer, his presence filling my awareness. Christopher Reyes betrayed me and abandoned his son. Both are unforgivable offenses in my world. My breath caught. What are you saying? I'm saying that Christopher's debts are now settled in a different way. His gaze traveled over me, not in a leering way, but as if cataloging every detail. Through you and your son. What exactly does that mean? I asked, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. Settled through us? Antonio's eyes never left mine as he closed the distance between us, each step deliberate. The floorboards didn't dare creak beneath his polished shoes. It means you're under my protection now. His voice was soft, but left no room for argument. You and the child. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold despite the apartment's poor heating. I never asked for your protection, yet you need it. He gestured around the cramped studio, the water stains spreading across the ceiling, the second-hand furniture, the bare cupboards visible through the open kitchen cabinet. This is no place to raise a child. It's all I can afford, I said, hating how defensive I sounded. Not everyone is born with options. Something flashed in his eyes, not anger, but something sharper. Recognition, perhaps. You think I was born into this? A hint of dark amusement colored his tone. He rolled up his right sleeve with precise movements, revealing a forearm marked with a jagged scar that ran from wrist to elbow. I grew up in a place worse than this. No father. Mother who worked 3 jobs and still couldn't keep the heat on. He rolled his sleeve back down. I made my own options. The glimpse into his past caught me off guard. I'd imagined him born into his power, not clawing his way up from circumstances like mine. It made him more real, and somehow more dangerous. I appreciate the help tonight, I said carefully, but we'll be fine now. He smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. Will you? The medicine will last 10 days. Then what happens when he gets sick again? Or when your landlord finally decides to evict you for the rent you're 3 months behind on? My blood ran cold. How do you? I know everything I need to know, Eliza. He moved to the window, looking out at the rain-slicked street below. Your lease, your employment record, your bank balance. He turned back to face me. Christopher stole from me, betrayed my trust. By all rights, I should take everything of his in return. Fear flooded my veins. Jamie is not mine to take. He finished, his voice dangerously soft. Perhaps, but I'm not interested in taking. I'm interested in providing. I don't understand. Antonio reached into his jacket and produced another envelope, thicker than the first. An address, keys, and enough money to get you settled. I didn't reach for it. What is this? A new apartment. In a building I own. Safe neighborhood. Good schools nearby. He placed the envelope on the counter beside the first one. You'll move there tomorrow. It wasn't a suggestion. The realization that this stranger was rearranging my life without my consent sent a flash of anger through my exhaustion. You can't just decide where I live. I already have. His tone remained calm, reasonable even, which only fueled my indignation. Why? Why would you do this for people you don't even know? Antonio's gaze shifted to Jamie, sleeping peacefully now that his pain had been eased. The child is innocent. He deserves better than an absent father and a life of struggle. His eyes found mine again. And you deserve better than to be abandoned with his responsibilities. There was something he wasn't saying, something beneath his words that I couldn't quite grasp. What's the catch? I asked bluntly. People like you don't just hand out apartments and money without expecting something in return? His expression darkened, and for a moment, I regretted my boldness, but I held his gaze, refusing to be intimidated in my own home, meager as it was. People like me? He repeated, his accent more pronounced in his irritation. You have no idea what kind of man I am. I know enough, I countered, surprising myself with my courage. Your suit costs more than my rent. You have a driver who doubles as security. Doctors come when you call in the middle of the night. And you talk about Christopher like he's... I trailed off, unwilling to say the words aloud. Like he's what? Antonio prompted, moving closer again, his presence magnetic and intimidating at once. Like his life is in your hands, I whispered. Antonio's smile was chilling in its sincerity. Very perceptive, Eliza. Yes, I have certain businesses, interests that require loyalty and discretion. Christopher provided neither. He reached out, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from my face. I froze at the contact, too stunned to pull away. But that's not your concern. It is, if you're involving me and my son in whatever this is. I'm not involving you in anything except a better life. His hand dropped away. The apartment is yours, no strings attached. You'll continue your job at Rossi's if you wish, though I could find you something more suitable. Why would you do this? I asked again, unable to understand his motives. Antonio was silent for a long moment, his gaze traveling over the small apartment before returning to me. Let's just say I believe in paying debts, even those that aren't mine to pay. Before I could respond, Jamie stirred, whimpering softly. I moved to him automatically, checking his forehead. Cooler now, the medicine beginning to work. When was the last time you slept, Eliza? Antonio asked, watching as I soothed Jamie back to sleep. The question caught me off guard with its genuine concern. I don't know. Really slept? Probably before he got sick, he nodded, as if confirming something to himself. You need rest. I'll have someone come tomorrow at noon to help you pack and move. I haven't agreed to this, I protested, though with less conviction than before. The truth was, an apartment in a safe building, in a good school district. It was everything Jamie deserved. Everything I'd been unable to give him. You will, Antonio said simply. He moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. One more thing. I'll be checking in regularly to ensure you have everything you need. This isn't charity, Eliza. It's an investment. In what? I asked. His eyes, dark and unreadable, held mine. In potential. With that cryptic answer, he left, the door closing behind him with a decisive click. I stood frozen, staring at the space where he'd been, trying to process everything that had happened in the last hour. My phone buzzed on the counter, a text message from the same number I'd called earlier. Take the medicine now. Doctor said it works faster if you don't wait until morning. I looked over at the antibiotics, then at Jamie. Without hesitation, I measured out the dose and gently roused him enough to take it. As I laid him back down, my phone buzzed again. And Eliza? Get some sleep. Tomorrow will be a new beginning. I didn't reply, but I found myself looking at the 2 envelopes on the counter. Curiosity finally won out, and I opened the first one. Cash. More cash than I'd seen in one place, neatly bundled. The second envelope contained keys, an address in Riverside Heights, one of the city's most exclusive neighborhoods, and more cash. This was madness. I didn't know this man. He was clearly dangerous, clearly involved in things I wanted no part of. And yet, he'd helped my son when no one else would. He was offering us a chance at a life I could never provide on my own. Was I really considering this? My gaze drifted to Jamie, his breathing finally even and peaceful. For him, I'd do anything. Even accept help from a devil in an Italian suit. I collapsed onto the couch, exhaustion finally claiming me. My last coherent thought before sleep took hold was wondering what exactly Antonio Ricci saw when he looked at me, a responsibility, a charity case, or something else entirely. The morning brought sunlight streaming through the threadbare curtains and the realization that Jamie's fever had broken completely. He babbled happily in his crib as I checked him over, relief washing through me in dizzying waves. The events of the previous night seemed dreamlike in the harsh light of day. The mysterious phone call, the intimidating man in the expensive suit, the offers that seemed too good to be true. But the envelopes on the counter were real. The medicine bottle with Dr. Marino's name on the label was real, and the text messages on my phone were real. At precisely 11:45 a.m., a knock at my door announced the arrival of a woman named Sophia, who introduced herself as Mr. Ricci's personal assistant. She was impeccably dressed, with a no-nonsense demeanor that somehow put me at ease despite the strangeness of the situation. "Mr. Ricci mentioned you might be hesitant," she said, surveying my half-packed belongings. I'd started gathering our things more out of necessity than acceptance. If nothing else, I needed to be prepared for whatever happened next. He wanted me to assure you that this arrangement comes with no obligations on your part. "Forgive me if I find that hard to believe," I replied, bouncing Jamie on my hip. He was fascinated by Sophia's dangly earrings, reaching for them with chubby fingers. Sophia's expression softened slightly as she looked at Jamie. "Mr. Ricci has his reasons. They may not make sense to you now, but he's a man of his word." She handed me a card with her number. "If you need anything at all, you call me directly." 3 hours later, I stood in the center of an apartment that made my old studio look like a closet by comparison. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating hardwood floors and modern, comfortable furniture. The kitchen gleamed with stainless steel appliances and marble countertops. Jamie's new room, he had his own room now, was fully furnished with a crib that probably cost more than all the furniture I'd ever owned combined. "This is temporary," I told myself, as I unpacked our meager belongings, feeling like an imposter in this space clearly designed for someone with more money, more class, more everything than me, just until I figure things out. But as the day wore on, as I gave Jamie a bath in a tub bigger than my old kitchen, as I put him down for a nap in his new room with its perfect temperature and soothing nightlight, a treacherous feeling of relief crept over me. For the first time in months, I wasn't consumed with worry about rent, about utilities, about whether the heat would stay on through the night. My phone buzzed just after 7, as I was exploring the fully stocked kitchen, Antonio's number. "The apartment is satisfactory?" I hesitated before typing back. "It's too much." His reply came immediately. "It's exactly enough. Is there anything else you need?" I looked around at the luxury surrounding me, at the security system by the door, at the view of the city skyline from the windows. "No. But I still don't understand why you're doing this." There was a longer pause before his response. "Some debts can only be repaid in unexpected ways. Are you working tomorrow?" The abrupt change of subject caught me off guard. "Yes, evening shift." "I'll have someone there at 5 to watch the child." Alarm shot through me. "That's not necessary. I have a babysitter." "Not anymore. My people are vetted, trained in first aid, and security conscious." I stared at the phone, indignation rising. "You can't just decide who watches my son." His next message was blunt. "I can when the alternative is leaving him with the 17-year-old daughter of your neighbor, who spends more time on her phone than watching your child." A chill ran down my spine. How did he know who my babysitter was? Had he been watching me before last night? The thought was unsettling. "I don't need a stranger watching my son," I typed back firmly. The response took nearly 5 minutes to arrive. "Elena is 52, raised 5 children of her own, and has worked for my family for 15 years. She's hardly a stranger to childcare. But if it makes you more comfortable, you can meet her tomorrow morning. She'll come at 10. It wasn't a request. I was beginning to understand that nothing Antonio said ever was. As if reading my thoughts, another text followed. This isn't negotiable, Eliza. Your son's safety is paramount. I put the phone down without responding, unsure whether to be grateful for his concern or terrified by his control. The line between protection and possession seemed dangerously thin. That night, as I lay in a bed more comfortable than any I'd ever slept in, listening to Jamie's soft breathing through the top-of-the-line baby monitor, I couldn't help but wonder what I'd gotten us into. I'd accepted help from a man who clearly operated outside the law, who commanded doctors and drivers and assistants with casual authority, who spoke of betrayal and consequences in the same breath as protection and provision. The next morning, Jamie woke me with his babbling, happier than I'd seen him in days. The antibiotics were working their magic, his ear infection retreating. As we settled into our morning routine in this unfamiliar luxury, I tried to ignore the gnawing anxiety about meeting this Elena person. At exactly 10 a.m., the doorbell chimed. When I opened the door, I found a woman with salt and pepper hair pulled into a neat bun, crow's feet around kind eyes that crinkled when she smiled. She wore simple dark pants and a cardigan, nothing like the intimidating presence I'd expected from someone in Antonio's employ. "You must be Eliza," she said, her Italian accent warm and melodic. "And this little one is Jamie?" She beamed at my son, who stared at her with wide-eyed curiosity from my hip. "Yes," I said cautiously. "You're Elena?" She nodded, producing a small stuffed elephant from her bag. "For the bambino," she explained, offering it to Jamie, who reached for it eagerly. Despite my reservations, there was something immediately trustworthy about Elena. She moved with the comfortable efficiency of someone who had indeed raised many children, and within minutes, she had Jamie giggling as she played peekaboo with him on the living room floor. "Mr. Ricci said you worked tonight?" she asked as she expertly built a tower of blocks for Jamie to knock over. "Yes," I confirmed, watching them interact. "I waitress at Rossi's. The evening shift ends at 11. Elena nodded. "I'll be here at 4:30. Don't worry about rushing home. Jamie and I will be fine, no matter how late." I hesitated, still uncomfortable with this arrangement that had been decided for me. "I appreciate the offer, but—" "It's not an offer, Kara," Elena interrupted gently. "Mr. Ricci is very clear about the child's care, and once you know me better, you'll see I'm much better than any teenager with a cell phone." The echo of Antonio's text from last night wasn't lost on me. These people were all extensions of his will, carrying out his commands with the same certainty he possessed. "How long have you worked for Mr. Ricci?" I asked, trying to gauge what kind of man would inspire such loyalty. Elena's smile turned knowing. "Since he was a boy himself, I worked for his uncle first, then for Antonio when he took over the family business." The slight pause spoke volumes. "And what exactly is that business?" I pressed, seizing the opportunity. "That's not for me to discuss," Elena replied smoothly. "But I can tell you that Mr. Ricci is a man of honor. His word is unbreakable." She looked up from Jamie with a seriousness that caught me off guard. "If he's promised you protection, you have it for life." A shiver ran down my spine at her words. For life. As if Antonio Ricci had claimed us permanently, written us into his ledger of responsibilities. "I never asked for protection," I said quietly. Elena's expression softened. "Sometimes the things we need most are not the things we ask for." She turned her attention back to Jamie, effectively ending the conversation. After she left, promising to return that afternoon, I found myself standing at the massive windows, looking out at a view of the city I could never have afforded on my own. My phone buzzed in my pocket. "Elena meets with your approval," Antonio's text read. I considered how to respond. The truth was, I did like Elena. She was clearly experienced with children, and Jamie had taken to her immediately, but admitting that felt like surrendering another piece of my independence. "She seems qualified," I typed finally. A neutral enough response. "High praise," came his immediate reply, and I could almost hear the dry amusement in his tone. "I'll be checking in this evening, after your shift." My pulse quickened. "That's not necessary." Nonetheless. One word, brooking no argument. I put the phone away without responding, unsure what to make of his continued interest. If this was truly just about repaying some warped sense of debt for Christopher's actions, why the personal involvement? Why not simply set us up and walk away? The question lingered as I prepared for my shift. As Elena arrived and settled in with Jamie, as if she'd been caring for him his whole life. As I walked into Rossi's with a strange mix of emotions churning inside me. Rossi's was an upscale Italian restaurant in the theater district, popular with the pre-show crowd and business dinners. I'd been lucky to get hired without much experience, and even luckier that they allowed some flexibility with my schedule as a single mother. The pay was decent, especially with tips, but never enough to get ahead, just enough to keep from drowning. "You look different," Meg, another waitress, commented as we prepared for the dinner rush. "Less exhausted? Did you actually sleep last night?" I managed a smile. "Jamie's feeling better. And yes, I actually slept." I couldn't bring myself to mention the rest. The midnight doctor visit, the mysterious benefactor, the new apartment that felt like stepping into someone else's life. It sounded insane even in my own head. The evening rush kept me busy, the familiar routine of taking orders, delivering food, and checking on tables a welcome distraction from the strangeness my life had become. Around 8, the maitre d' approached me with an unusual request. "Table 7 has asked for you specifically," he said, nodding toward a corner booth partially hidden by a decorative wine rack. "That's not my section," I replied, confused. I didn't have regular customers who requested me. "It is now," he said with a shrug. "VIP guest." With a sense of foreboding, I made my way to table 7. I knew who I'd find there before I even rounded the wine rack. Antonio Ricci sat alone, his dark suit impeccable, his posture relaxed yet commanding. He wasn't looking at a menu. He was watching the restaurant, observing everything with those penetrating eyes. When he saw me, his lips curved into the barest smile. "Eliza," he said, my name like smoke on his tongue. "Mr. Ricci," I replied, falling back on professional courtesy to mask my surprise. "I wasn't expecting to see you here." "Antonio," he corrected, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Sit for a moment." I glanced around nervously. "I'm working." "Your manager won't mind." His certainty made me wonder just how much influence he had, and where. Just for a minute. Against my better judgment, I slid into the seat opposite him. Up close, in the warm lighting of the restaurant, I could better appreciate the sharp lines of his face, the intensity in his dark eyes. "How are you settling in?" he asked, studying me with unnerving focus. "Fine," I said cautiously. "The apartment is very nice, thank you." He nodded, as if my gratitude was expected but unnecessary. "And Jamie? The medicine is working?" The genuine concern in his voice caught me off guard. "Yes. He's much better today. Elena is with him now. Good." He sipped from a glass of red wine. "Elena raised me after my mother died. There's no one I trust more with children." This casual revelation about his past surprised me. "I'm sorry about your mother." Something flashed in his eyes, an old pain, quickly contained. "It was a long time ago." He set down his glass. "You look uncomfortable, Eliza. Why?" His directness was disarming, because I don't understand what's happening. Why you're helping us. Why you're here now. Antonio leaned forward slightly, his gaze never leaving mine. "I told you. Christopher's debts needed to be paid, and you've paid them. More than paid them. So why are you still involved?" I pressed, needing to understand. He was quiet for a moment, considering me with an expression I couldn't read. Finally, he said, "When I heard your son crying over the phone that night, I was in a meeting with men who have forgotten what matters in this world. Men who would sacrifice anything, anyone, for power and profit." His voice hardened. "I was becoming one of them." I waited, sensing there was more. That cry reminded me of things I'd forgotten. Innocence. Vulnerability. His eyes darkened. Responsibility. "Jamie is not your responsibility," I said softly. "No," he agreed, "but once I involved myself, once I made the choice to help, you both became my concern." He leaned back, his expression shifting to something more controlled. "I protect what's mine, Eliza." A chill ran through me at his words. "We're not yours." The smile that curved his lips held no humor. "Everyone in my world belongs somewhere, to someone." Protection requires allegiance. I never agreed to that, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. You accepted my help, my apartment, my money. His tone wasn't accusatory, merely stating facts. In my world, that creates a bond. Before I could respond, he continued. I'm not asking for anything from you, Eliza. Just allowing me to ensure you and your son are taken care of. Why? I asked again, frustrated by his circular reasoning. Antonio's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Because it pleases me to do so. He glanced at his watch. You should get back to work. I've taken enough of your time. I stood, still unsatisfied with his answers, but aware of my manager watching from across the restaurant. Will you be ordering dinner? I already have. He smiled. Your Rossi's colleague Paolo knows what I prefer. Of course he did. Antonio Ricci clearly made it his business to know everyone and everything in his orbit, and somehow, Jamie and I had been pulled into that orbit. Whether I'd intended it or not, the rest of my shift passed in a blur. Antonio remained at his table, occasionally conducting quiet business with men who joined him briefly before disappearing again. He didn't summon me back, but I felt his eyes on me throughout the evening, tracking my movements as I served other tables. Just before 11, as I was finishing my last table, Paolo approached me with a heavy envelope. Your tips, he said with a wink. Good night for you. The envelope was thick, far too thick for the modest tips I'd earned. I knew immediately where the extra had come from. Part of me wanted to march back to table 7 and return it, to reject this continued attempt to... What? Buy me? Control me? But Antonio was gone, his table empty and cleaned. Outside, the night air was crisp with early autumn. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, exhaustion settling into my bones despite the anxiety still thrumming through my veins. As I turned toward the bus stop, a habit, though I now lived just a few blocks away in the luxury apartment, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The back window lowered, revealing Antonio's inscrutable face. Get in. I'll drive you home. I can walk, I said, more out of stubbornness than practicality. It's not far. It's after 11, and this neighborhood changes after dark. His tone left no room for argument. Get in the car, Eliza. Against my better judgment, I did. The interior was all soft leather and subtle opulence, smelling faintly of his cologne. Antonio sat across from me, the space between us both too small and impossibly vast. You left me money, I said, pulling out the envelope. I can't accept this. He didn't even glance at it. Your son needs new clothes. Winter is coming. The heating in your old apartment was inadequate. The fact that he knew such specific details about our life before he entered it was unsettling. Have you been watching me before that night? Antonio's expression remained neutral. I make it my business to know the people in my territory. Rossi's is one of my investments. When you were hired 6 months ago, your name crossed my desk with others. So you knew who I was when I called? You were playing with me? Anger flashed hot in my chest. No, he said sharply. I had no interest in you until that call, until I heard your voice, your desperation, your son's cries. His jaw tightened, until I realized who the father was. The car slowed as we approached my new building, his building. Antonio continued, his voice softer now. I don't play games, Eliza. Everything I've done has been exactly what it appears to be. And what is that? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. His eyes met mine, dark and intense in the shadowed car. Taking care of what Christopher abandoned, providing what he should have provided, being where he should have been. His words hung in the air between us, heavy with implications I wasn't ready to face. The car stopped outside the building, but neither of us moved. You can't replace him, I said finally. Jamie's father, I mean. Antonio's expression darkened. I have no desire to replace Christopher Reyes. The man was a coward and a thief. His voice was cold, precise. But a child needs stability, security, a future. He studied me with those penetrating eyes. And so does his mother. Before I could respond, he opened his door and stepped out, circling around to my side. The driver, The same broad-shouldered man who'd accompanied him to my old apartment remained stoically behind the wheel. Antonio extended his hand to help me out, a gesture so formal and old-fashioned it momentarily disarmed me. Hesitantly, I placed my hand in his. His fingers closed around mine, warm and strong, as he guided me from the car. The brief contact sent an unwelcome shiver up my arm. "Elena will stay until we arrive," he said as we entered the building's elegant lobby. The doorman nodded deferentially as we passed. "We?" I questioned, punching the elevator button. Antonio's lips curved slightly. "I'd like to see how Jamie is doing." The elevator ride to the 15th floor was silent, the space too small for his commanding presence. I found myself hyper-aware of every movement, every breath. When the doors opened, he gestured for me to exit first, then followed me down the hallway to his apartment. Elena opened the door before I could even reach for my keys. She smiled warmly, though I didn't miss the respectful nod she gave Antonio as we entered. "Jamie is sleeping soundly," she reported. "The fever is gone completely. We had a good evening." "Thank you, Elena," Antonio replied, his tone gentler than I'd heard him use with anyone else. "Go home to Marco. He's waited up for you, I'm sure." She smiled, collecting her things. "As always, Mr. Ricci. Good night, Eliza. I'll see you tomorrow." As Elena departed, Antonio moved through the apartment with the casual confidence of ownership, which of course he had. He shrugged off his suit jacket, draping it over a chair, and loosened his tie slightly. The gesture was strangely intimate, transforming him from intimidating Mafia boss to something more human. "May I see him?" he asked, nodding toward Jamie's room. I hesitated only briefly before leading him down the hallway. We entered quietly, the room bathed in the soft glow of the nightlight. Jamie lay on his back, arms flung wide, his breathing deep and even. He looked tiny in the large crib, surrounded by new blankets and stuffed animals that hadn't been there when we moved in. Antonio stood at the cribside, looking down at my son with an expression I couldn't decipher. Something between wonder and resolve, tenderness and determination. "He looks like you," he said softly. "Everyone says that," I replied, echoing our conversation from that first night. "It's a blessing." His voice hardened almost imperceptibly. "He'll grow up with nothing of his father in him." The conviction in his tone raised the hairs on the back of my neck. "You really hate Christopher, don't you?" Antonio turned from the crib, his eyes meeting mine in the dim light. "Hate requires emotional investment. What I feel for Christopher is simpler. He betrayed me, stole from me, and abandoned his child. In my world, any one of those offenses has consequences." I swallowed hard, afraid to ask what those consequences might be. Afraid I already knew. We retreated to the living room, leaving Jamie to his peaceful sleep. Antonio moved to the kitchen, opening cabinets with familiar ease until he found what he was looking for. An expensive bottle of scotch I certainly hadn't purchased. "Drink?" he offered, pouring himself a glass. I shook my head. "I don't need alcohol to have this conversation." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Which conversation is that? The one where you finally tell me what you really want from me?" I gathered my courage, facing him directly. "No more vague talk about protection or debts or responsibility. Why are you really doing all this?" Antonio took his time answering, sipping his scotch as he considered me with those penetrating eyes. Finally, he set down his glass. "When I was a boy," he began, his voice taking on a quality I hadn't heard before. "My father left us. Not by choice. He was killed in a dispute with a rival family. My mother worked herself to death trying to provide for me. I was 10 when Elena took me in, brought me to my uncle's house. He moved to the window, looking out at the city lights. I promised myself that when I had power, I would never allow a child in my care to suffer as I had. He turned back to me, his expression unreadable. When I heard your son crying, when I realized who his father was and what had happened, it became personal. Christopher was mine, my employee, my responsibility. His child became my responsibility by extension. Jamie is my responsibility, I countered. Mine alone. And how well were you managing that responsibility? He asked, his tone not unkind but brutally direct. In an apartment with black mold in the bathroom, working double shifts and still unable to pay rent, unable to afford proper medical care when he fell ill, each word hit like a physical blow because they contained uncomfortable truths. I had been drowning, barely keeping Jamie's head above water. The guilt and shame of my failure burned in my chest. I was doing my best, I whispered. Antonio's expression softened. I know you were. He moved closer, closing the distance between us. But now you don't have to do it alone. Why should you care? I asked, my voice breaking slightly. Why us? There are thousands of single mothers struggling in this city, but only one whose child's father betrayed me. He reached out, his fingers brushing my cheek in a touch so unexpected I froze. Only one who called me that night, who trusted a stranger to help her son when no one else would. I should have stepped back. I should have maintained the distance between us. But something in his gaze held me there. Something beyond the power and danger he wore like a second skin. What happens now? I asked, my voice barely audible. His hand dropped away. Now you continue living your life, working at Rossi's if you wish, or somewhere else if you prefer, raising your son in safety and comfort. And I continue ensuring that safety. For how long? For as long as necessary. His expression turned serious. There's something you should know, Eliza. Christopher didn't just disappear. He's being hunted. Not just by me, but by others he crossed. People far less restrained than I am. Fear clutched at my heart. Are Jamie and I in danger? Not while you're under my protection. The certainty in his voice was both reassuring and terrifying. But yes, potentially. Christopher stole more than money. He took information, documents that could damage certain business arrangements. I haven't heard from him in months, I said quickly. He doesn't even know where we live. I believe you, Antonio replied. But others might not be so trusting, which is why you need to stay close to me, to accept my help without question. The realization hit me with dizzying clarity. This wasn't just about some warped sense of responsibility or atonement. This was about using us as bait, as leverage. You think he'll come back for us, I said, the words bitter on my tongue. You think you can use us to get to him. Something dangerous flashed in Antonio's eyes. If that were my intention, I would have left you in that squalid apartment as easy targets. I brought you here, to one of the most secure buildings in the city, with my own people watching over you. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. I'm not using you as bait, Eliza. I'm keeping you safe from those who might. I wanted to believe him. Despite everything, his obvious criminal connections, his controlling nature, the implied threat beneath his protection, I wanted to trust that his intentions toward Jamie and me were genuine. I need time, I said finally. Time to process all of this. Antonio nodded once, accepting my response with surprising grace. Time you have, but not distance, not now. He retrieved his jacket from the chair. I'll have a car waiting for you tomorrow before your shift. Elena will stay with Jamie. It wasn't a request. I was beginning to understand that with Antonio Ricci, very little was ever truly optional. Good night, Eliza, he said, moving toward the door. He paused, turning back with an expression I couldn't read. Lock the door behind me. The security system is activated automatically. No one enters this building without my knowledge. After he left, I sank onto the sofa, my mind racing with everything I'd learned. Jamie and I weren't just recipients of Antonio's generosity. We were potentially in danger from Christopher's other enemies. We were assets Antonio was protecting, for reasons that still felt murky and complex. And yet, there had been something in his expression when he looked at Jamie, something genuine that couldn't be entirely strategic. The way he spoke about his own childhood, about responsibility and protection, it rang true, despite everything else. I checked on Jamie one more time before heading to bed, watching his peaceful sleep and wondering what kind of future I was creating for him by accepting Antonio's help. Was I trading one form of struggle for another, more dangerous kind? Or was this truly his chance, our chance, at security and stability? Sleep eluded me as I turned these questions over in my mind, along with the unsettling awareness of how Antonio's touch had affected me. It was easier to think of him as a dangerous criminal, a manipulative power player using us for his own ends. It was much harder to reconcile that image with the man who had stood over my son's crib with such tenderness, who spoke of his own lost childhood with raw honesty. The next few weeks established a routine that felt surreal in its contrast to my previous life. Each morning, I woke to luxury I was slowly becoming accustomed to. Elena arrived like clockwork to care for Jamie when I worked. A sleek, black car appeared before each shift and waited after to bring me home, though Antonio himself rarely accompanied it. He checked in regularly, sometimes in person, but more often through texts or calls. His questions were always the same. Did we need anything? Was Jamie well? Was I comfortable? He never pushed for more, never made explicit demands. And yet, I felt his presence in every aspect of our new life. Jamie flourished in the stable environment, growing stronger and more animated by the day. His ear infection cleared completely, and the regular nutritious meals Elena prepared helped him gain healthy weight. He smiled more, slept better, thrived in ways that both delighted me and reinforced the harsh reality that I hadn't been able to provide this for him on my own. One evening, returning from a shift at Rossi's, I found Antonio in the apartment, sitting on the floor of the living room, while Jamie demonstrated his newfound crawling skills. The sight was so unexpected, so domestic, that I froze in the doorway. Antonio looked up, and something in his expression, a brief, unguarded warmth, made my heart stutter. "He's determined," Antonio remarked, as Jamie pulled himself up on the coffee table, wobbling but triumphant. "Strong-willed. Like his mother," Elena commented from the kitchen doorway, giving me a knowing look that made heat rush to my cheeks. "Indeed," Antonio agreed, his dark eyes finding mine with an intensity that had become familiar, but no less unsettling. That night marked a shift, though I couldn't have articulated exactly what had changed. Antonio began appearing more frequently, for dinner, on my days off, always with some plausible reason that didn't quite explain the length of his stays. He brought gifts for Jamie, educational toys, books, clothes that were practical yet clearly expensive. He never arrived empty-handed for me either. Sometimes flowers, sometimes books he thought I might enjoy, once a delicate gold bracelet I initially refused, but later found myself wearing anyway. We were falling into a pattern that felt dangerously like family, and I wasn't sure how to feel about it. Antonio never pushed for more than I offered, never made explicit what he wanted from me beyond my acceptance of his protection. But I wasn't naive. I saw the way his eyes followed me when he thought I wasn't looking, felt the electric tension when our hands accidentally brushed, noticed how he positioned himself between me and any perceived threat when we ventured outside the apartment. One evening, after Jamie had been put to bed, Antonio lingered over a glass of wine at the kitchen island. I'd stopped questioning his presence weeks ago, had even begun to anticipate his visits with a flutter of something I refused to name. "You seem troubled," he observed, those perceptive eyes missing nothing. I hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I got a call today, from my old landlord." Antonio's expression sharpened. "What did he want?" "To tell me that someone came by asking questions about me and Jamie." I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold despite the apartment's perfect temperature. A man he didn't recognize, claiming to be a relative, the glass in Antonio's hand stilled halfway to his lips. Description? Tall, blonde, with a scar on his chin. I met his gaze steadily. It wasn't Christopher, but the landlord thought he seemed dangerous. Antonio set down his glass with deliberate care. "Why didn't you call me immediately?" "Because I knew you'd react like this," I said simply. "And because I needed time to think." He moved around the island until he stood directly before me, close enough that I could smell his cologne, could feel the controlled tension radiating from him. "This isn't something to think about, Eliza. This is something to act on." His voice was low, urgent. "Did the landlord tell this man where you'd gone?" "He doesn't know where I am," I replied. "But he gave him my old phone number, the one I had before you gave me this new one." Antonio cursed under his breath, reaching for his own phone. He fired off several rapid texts before turning back to me. "This is exactly why I wanted you here, under protection. Christopher's associates are getting desperate. They think he may have left the documents with you." What documents? I asked, frustrated by the vague threat that had been hanging over us for weeks. You've never explained exactly what he took or why people are looking for it. Antonio's jaw tightened. Financial records, account numbers, client information. He seemed to be weighing how much to tell me. Evidence that could destroy certain arrangements between organizations. Illegal arrangements, I clarified, needing to hear him say it. Yes. He didn't flinch from the admission. Christopher was in charge of sensitive deliveries. Not just goods, but information. He had access to details he shouldn't have accessed. When he disappeared, so did those details. And you think he might have hidden them with me? I asked incredulously. The woman he abandoned pregnant and broke? Not intentionally, Antonio conceded, but he might have left something, anything, without your knowledge. A USB drive, a file hidden in something ordinary. I shook my head, mentally cataloging the few possessions Christopher had left behind. There's nothing. He took everything of his when he left. The only thing I have is... I stopped suddenly, a memory surfacing. What? Antonio pressed, alert to my hesitation. His watch, I said slowly. An expensive one. He left it on the nightstand the last time he stayed over. I kept it, thinking I might sell it if things got desperate enough. I'd nearly forgotten about it, buried in a drawer of my old apartment and packed away in the hasty move. Antonio's expression changed. Where is it now? In my jewelry box. I never got around to selling it. He followed me to the bedroom, waiting at the threshold as I retrieved a battered wooden box from the closet. Inside, nestled among my few modest pieces of jewelry, was Christopher's watch. A heavy stainless steel timepiece with a black face. Antonio took it carefully, examining it from all angles. Then, to my surprise, he popped open the back casing. Inside, tucked beneath the mechanics, was a tiny microchip. This, he said, holding it up to the light, is what everyone has been looking for. I stared at the inconspicuous chip, stunned that it had been in my possession all this time. So, now what happens? Antonio slipped the chip into his pocket. Now, I can finally end this. Neutralize the threat completely. The clinical way he said it sent a chill through me. You're going to kill him, aren't you, Christopher? His eyes met mine, unflinching. Would that bother you? The man abandoned you and his son. Left you in poverty while he ran with stolen goods and information that put you both in danger. Of course it would bother me, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. Not because I care about him, but because that's not who I want to be. Someone who accepts murder as a solution. Not who I want Jamie to be connected to. Something shifted in Antonio's expression. Respect, perhaps, mingled with frustration. What would you have me do, Eliza? Let him go? Let him continue putting you and Jamie at risk? I moved closer, driven by an impulse I didn't fully understand. There are other ways to neutralize threats. Turn the evidence over to the police. Have him arrested. A bitter laugh escaped him. The police? You think this is so simple? I think you have enough power and influence to make it simple, I countered. To choose a different path than violence. For a long moment, he just looked at me. Something warring in his expression. Then, to my surprise, he reached out, his fingers brushing my cheek with startling gentleness. You still see the world as it should be? Not as it is, he murmured. Even after everything. I didn't pull away from his touch. Maybe that's what you need. Someone to remind you there are choices beyond the ones you're used to making. The air between us changed, charged with something beyond the danger and secrets that had defined our strange relationship. Antonio's hand slid to the nape of my neck, his touch both possessive and questioning. Is that what you want to be, Eliza? The voice of my conscience? His voice had dropped lower, intimate in a way that sent heat curling through me. I want to be myself, I whispered. Not an obligation, not a responsibility, not a debt to be paid. You've never been just a debt, he said, his eyes darkening. From the first moment I heard your voice on that phone, heard your son crying, you became something else entirely. What? I asked, my heart thundering in my ears. A possibility, he answered. And then his lips were on mine. The kiss was nothing like I expected. Not domineering or possessive, but questioning, almost reverent. I should have pulled away. I should have remembered all the reasons this was complicated and dangerous. Instead, I found myself responding, my hands sliding up his chest to his shoulders, feeling the solid strength of him beneath expensive fabric. When we finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, the world seemed to have shifted on its axis. Antonio rested his forehead against mine, his hands now framing my face. "I didn't plan this," he said softly. "Any of it. I know." And somehow, I did know. Whatever game he might have been playing initially had evolved into something neither of us had anticipated. He drew back slightly, his expression serious. "I'll handle Christopher my way, but he won't be harmed. You have my word." His thumb traced my lower lip. "For you and Jamie, I can try to be a better man than my position usually allows." It wasn't a perfect promise, but it was honest. And honesty was something I'd come to value from him, even when the truth was complex and shadowed. "I don't expect you to change who you are," I said carefully. "Just to remember there are lines even you don't have to cross." His smile held a hint of sadness. "You have more faith in me than I deserve." "Maybe," I acknowledged. "Or maybe I see something in you that your world doesn't allow you to show very often." The moment was broken by Jamie's cry from the nursery, a familiar sound that now carried different meaning. Antonio stepped back, allowing me space. "Go to him," he said. "We'll talk more tomorrow." After he left, I sat in the rocking chair in Jamie's room, long after my son had fallen back asleep, turning over everything that had happened. The found microchip, the kiss, the promises made, all of it felt like crossing a threshold I could never return from. Yet, strangely, I felt more at peace than I had in months. There was clarity in finally acknowledging what had been building between Antonio and me, in bringing our unspoken connection into the open. Whatever came next, at least it would be honest. 3 days later, I woke to breaking news on every channel. A major corruption bust involving several city officials, business leaders, and organized crime figures. The operation had apparently been months in the planning, triggered by an anonymous tip and crucial evidence provided by a confidential informant. Christopher Reyes was named as the informant, having turned himself in with a plea deal that granted him immunity in exchange for testimony. The report mentioned he had been in protective custody for several weeks, working with federal authorities. My phone rang as I stared at the television in shock. "You've seen the news?" Antonio said without preamble when I answered. "Yes," I replied, still processing. "Did you?" "I gave him a choice," Antonio said, his voice neutral. "Face my justice or turn state's evidence." He chose the latter, surprisingly intelligent for once in his miserable life. There was a pause. "He'll be relocated after the trials. Witness protection. He won't trouble you or Jamie again. You kept your word," I said softly, still hardly believing it. "I told you, Eliza. For you, I can be better than my nature." I closed my eyes, relief washing through me. "Where are you? Are you safe?" The implications of the bust weren't lost on me. Antonio's name hadn't been mentioned in the reports, but his associates, his world, was clearly implicated. "I'm insulated," he replied. "My legitimate businesses were kept separate from the operations that are being dismantled. It will require adjustments to certain arrangements, but nothing I can't manage." There was a hesitation in his voice I hadn't heard before. "The question is, now that this chapter is closed, what happens with us?" It was the first time he'd acknowledged that there was an us to consider, that what existed between us had become something defined enough to question. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "This isn't a normal beginning. None of this has been normal." "No," he agreed. "But perhaps that's fitting. Neither of us is particularly conventional." I could hear the smile in his voice. "Will you come over tonight?" I asked. "After Jamie's asleep, we can talk about what happens next." "I'll be there," he promised. 6 months later, Jamie took his first steps across the living room of our new house. Not an apartment this time, but a proper home with a garden and a nursery painted with jungle animals. He toddled unsteadily from my outstretched arms toward Antonio, who knelt a few feet away, his usually stern face transformed by a genuine smile. "That's it, Campione," Antonio encouraged as Jamie reached him, tiny hands gripping his shoulders in triumph. "You're getting stronger every day." I watched them together, my heart full with a happiness I'd never expected to find. The path that had brought us here was unconventional, shadowed by danger and secrets. But it had led to something real. Antonio had kept his promise, restructuring his businesses to focus on the legitimate enterprises: restaurants, real estate, import, export, while gradually disentangling from the darker operations that had once defined his power. It wasn't a complete transformation. He was still a man who commanded respect, and sometimes fear, who moved through the world with the confidence of someone accustomed to authority. But he had chosen a different direction, had allowed himself to be influenced by love rather than tradition or vengeance. As for me, I'd found strength I didn't know I possessed. The courage to accept help without surrendering my identity, to love a complicated man without excusing his flaws, to build a family unlike any I'd imagined, but exactly what Jamie and I needed. "What are you thinking about?" Antonio asked, looking up at me as Jamie abandoned his new walking skills in favor of crawling toward his toys. "About wrong numbers and midnight calls," I said, smiling. "About how sometimes the biggest mistakes lead to the truest paths." He rose and crossed to me, drawing me into his arms with the gentle possessiveness that had become familiar and cherished. "Not mistakes," he corrected, echoing words from that first night. "Opportunities disguised as accidents." As his lips met mine, Jamie's happy babbling providing the soundtrack to our embrace, I silently thanked whatever twist of fate had led me to dial that wrong number on a desperate night. Sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected sources, and sometimes family is found rather than born into. And sometimes a single mother's accidental call to a Mafia boss becomes the beginning of a love story neither of them saw coming, but both were destined to find.